Good day and welcome to this episode of The County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. Recently, the Southern Utah University held their annual Rural Summit. One of the keynote speakers at the event was Charles Fluharty. Did I say that correctly?
That's close.
I'm sorry, I'm not real well versed in Irish. I'm Welsh in background.
That's good.
And you are the CEO of the Rural Policy Research Institute. He's agreed to join us for a conversation about issues of rural importance in Utah. Your institute group is actually funded by the USDA, and so your task mission is to look out for the interests of rural America. If we were to start this conversation by summarizing a trend of what's the future for rural Utah, there have been some people, even appointees of the current administration, that have said that it's becoming irrelevant and it's breaking down and it's falling apart. Would you agree with that assessment?
I think every place is different, Chad. I would say Utah is uniquely blessed because of some of the work that has gone on over the last couple of administrations in how state government is looking at the rural future, but also just how creation blessed you. I'd say there are three trends that are going to differentiate how one rural place or one region is going to be better than another. And it would be these. Are we about innovation? Are we about regional governance, not government, private sector, and philanthropy, but those working together? Thirdly, are we thinking about sustainable futures, not just short-term jobs? So are we thinking about long-term rural wealth creation? And then lastly, how much was that region blessed at the start with natural assets? Those assets would be human capital, social capital, wealth, natural resources, great ag, et cetera, et cetera. Rural America is very diverse. There are a lot of places doing very well, a lot of places holding their own, and a lot of places doing very poorly. If you've seen one rural place, you've seen one rural place. But those three things, I would argue, are the things to be thinking about in an entrepreneurial future for rural America.
You'll see in Utah, remnants of a mining boom, but the communities have still managed to keep themselves stitched together. And you'll see areas that were once just little sleepy hamlets that were agrarian supported, and they've become tourism meccas. How does that play into the scenarios of these two different kinds of...
Here's the simple recipe.
Okay.
What are your assets? How do you think about those? What is your region? It could be one county, it could be 5, it could be 2 communities. How are you advantaging what's best in your assets, minimizing your liabilities, and creating linked investment streams around a common future vision for that region? You have to do 3 things. You have to have a really serious dialogue about what it is. The chamber has to agree with Farm Bureau, has to agree with the schools, has to agree with the social service agencies. Where it's really happening well, there's a serious dialogue about envisioning our future and moving toward it as opposed to letting it happen. Secondly, it really is about linked investments. There's a lot of wealth in rural America, even in our poorest communities. Is that being turned into a future there, or is that going to leave when those gentlemen die? And most often the communities that have strong community foundations, strong schools, strong chambers are going to be better off. But the reality is there are some places that simply will not have the scale in the future to be what they once were. We need to name that.
I understand you say there's dialogue. How do they identify how to get to that dialogue and how far they have to go to get that linkage with another community?
It's going to vary with every place. There are places that have really good economic development officers. There are places that have great mayors, great county commissioners, great regional councils of government that are working together. It's going to vary a whole lot by the leadership in place. More than anything else, leadership in place is key. After that, you really do need to do a serious assessment of the value chains you have. If you're in a company town, a single business town, if you're in an extraction industry, how are we diversifying the economy so that when that leaves, there's still something here? But above everything else, it's really getting a serious look at what are our assets, what's the value chain in the cluster we can be in, how do we optimize that with other partners, and almost always, it's reaching beyond ourselves with that knowledge to build a regional scale to what we want to do.
We will continue this conversation when we come back on the county seat. Go grab your notebook. I think if you live in rural Utah, you're going to want to take notes. We'll be right back.
Kanab, base camp for your southern Utah adventures. You belong in Kanab.
Carbon County is typically known for its industry and coal production, but that's not all. Utah's Castle Country has something for everyone. Carbon Country Club Golf Course, with 18 great holes of perfectly manicured fairways and pristine greens, is second to none. And with 4 sets of tees, the whole family can enjoy our golf course. Plus, if you hit it bad enough, you might even find some Indian pictographs hidden in the cliffs above the 18th hole. Visit castlecountry.com for more info.
Along Interstate 70 and Highway 89 is an area that is rich with high mountain peaks, vast forests, lakes, streams, historical sites, and a climate that is perfect for outdoor adventures, no matter what the season. Join us in Richfield, September 16th through the 20th for the Rocky Mountain ATV Jamboree. Bring the family for guided tours of some of the finest riding in all of the state. In the center of it all, Sevier County.
Welcome back to the county seat. Our conversation today is one-on-one with Chuck Fluharty, who is with the USDA in a think tank called the Rural Policy Research Institute. I'd like to pick up where we left off, as we were talking about, you know, the visioning and economic future. Government is a part of this, local, state, federal. I'm sure that they cast a pall or paint a color on the tapestry of what a community does. What do governments need to be doing as far as their responsibility to foster this new paradigm that you're talking about?
Chad, there's 3 things going on. Federalism is going to lighten its footprint over the next generation. We're in a new world. The relationship between the federal government and state government radically changing. That's going to exacerbate. People aren't aware of the level at which funding will be reduced. That's going to mean state government is going to work in new ways with regional and county governments, and that's going to mean those governments are going to work more directly with local governments, mayors, etc. Government is important because government can harm strategic innovation. Government can also help it. But the bottom line is this is largely with the firms that are there, the community leadership that's there, and the anchor tenants, and there are 4 or 5 of those. Education, the entrepreneurship community, the chamber, etc. Whatever the local asset is in the natural resource base, is it agriculture, is it an extraction industry, is it tourism, etc. And then lastly, the link between universities, regional universities, community colleges, and schools and grade schools. If those are working together, you will begin to get a yeasting of a commitment to a common vision. It needs to be driven by the private sector, so the chamber has to be there, the economic developers have to be there. But we are seeing wherever it feels right, government is collaborating like they never did before. The feds know they are going to need to be collaborators now. They are not going to be dictators. In many cases, these agencies are starting a whole new way of thinking about their role. That's positive, very positive. So government needs to do the very same thing we're asking communities to do. Collaborate, share, and try to work at a common future.
It's very good to hear you actually say that the paradigm of federal agencies is actually changing, because they're probably few dozen people watching this program right now who are throwing their shoes at the television set because they say, if it's changing, I'm not seeing it.
Well, I would agree with him, but it is going to happen, and it's going to be driven largely by budgets. The federal government is shrinking. It's going to continue to shrink, and thoughtful, creative people who care about that and care about the relationship with governors and state legislatures are already thinking about how we do the new dance. And that's going to be very, very important because every sector is a little different, and we have sectors that are largely controlled by the federal government and sectors where they control very little, our educational system. But you ask the question, government needs to innovate, collaborate, be less prescriptive, more flexible, and allow folks in communities to do the same thing. That isn't going to happen overnight, but it's going to happen. And the reason states are so key, let's look at your state. Utah is blessed right now. It didn't just happen. It was enlightened leadership. And state governors, legislatures, mayors are beginning to realize that if they think creatively, they can advance agendas at minimal cost that otherwise would not occur, because we're in a period where all of the checkerboard is changing. And in this creative chaos, new exciting opportunity for civic entrepreneurship occurs. Regional compacts, publicly led private sector investment, public-private linkages in workforce, on and on and on. The problem is that is happening more in metropolitan areas than it is in rural areas. Part of it's our culture, part of it's our scale is smaller. We really need to ramp up how that occurs in our rural countryside.
How do you do that? I mean, there are probably people going, okay, great, I'm on. How do we do it?
Well, we won't get it done on this show, but it's about leadership. Everything is about leadership. And that can be a church. That can be a community college. It can be an insurance company. It could be a chamber. But I've got the greatest job on earth. I travel all around the country and, just like here today, learn about innovation that's occurring at the state and sub-state level. It is all about leadership, recognizing collaboration, entrepreneurship, a new narrative, linked investments. If you're doing it the same way you did 5 years ago, you're dead.
Okay, so the thought just entered my mind. This new paradigm is starting, and you get those juices flowing at that local level, but you may have a federal agency from a regional level on down that hasn't caught that vision.
You think?
And they still think that the dictatorial, this is the way it's going to be, and by golly, it's going to be that way. What happens when that collision occurs between this new paradigm or this new dynamic and that old residue?
You get the public divisiveness we have today, and it is a scourge on our culture. We really don't have a middle right now in our body politic, and if all of those governments don't back away a bit, those of us that are citizens trying to build futures for our grandkids in rural communities are going to have a harder time. The feds are slow to change. I would say the lab is in the states, without a doubt, where the innovation occurring is even below the state. But this is coming. Now, we live in a public land state. We live where the BLM history is there. It's more evident here as a complete fissure because of that. And of course it would be. But I've been at this game 40 years. We're in a new world. The federal government realizes it's going to have to change. It may take another election or two, but we're going to be in a different world, I think, in 5 to 7 years, where there is going to be greater flexibility, greater waivers, et cetera, et cetera. Public lands is a great example. Could the states do more? Could we create waivers? Could we have common input decision making? Of course we could. We just haven't decided to do it yet. That takes public leadership.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more of The County Seat. I hope you're enjoying the program. I certainly am.
If you haven't been to Starvation in a while, you're in for a great surprise. New campsites, new cabins, and beach improvements await your next visit. Just 2 hours away, but a world away from the Wasatch Front in Duchesne County. Starvation State Park is located 4 miles northwest of Duchesne, just off US Highway 40. Duchesne County. Close enough for business, far enough to get away.
I didn't order this.
Compliments of the lady in gold.
Hello, trouble.
Anything worth doing in this quiet little town?
You look like the kind of man that could show a girl a good time.
You strike me as the kind of girl that likes a manicure and a massage.
How's that for a manicure?
I hate golf.
I was hoping for something a little more vigorous.
Vigorous, I can do.
And I thought you'd be riding side saddle.
What? I'm gonna regret this. How about that manicure?
Welcome back to the county seat. We're having a great discussion today about the future of rural America and how it hinges upon us thinking differently about the way government and the people governed interact. How do you as a local community get that end run around so people aren't looking at the color of the backside of their lapels to determine whether they're going to have a conversation or not?
Well, it used to be we didn't work with the next town because they beat us in the sectional football game in 1996. We're almost over that. Then it was consolidation on school boards, and we've still got a battle there. But I'd say there are 3 major divisions that we need to understand better. The first is the rural-urban division. The second is the Republican-Democrat large division. And the third is the public-private philanthropic division. They all impact rural futures. There is a general understanding in urban America that they are the engines of economic future for America. That is absolutely not true. There's a general understanding in rural America that they are deprived and are really the stepchild of an urban economy. That is not true. There's a new OECD study just out, the deepest study that OECD has ever done. That is the Organization of Developed Nations. They have the finest economists in government on earth, just released last year. 66% of the growth in our GDP in America does not come from our global cities. And in fact, when you go down to the smaller levels of GDP in regions, 67% of a state's GDP does not come out of its micropolitan cities, 10,000 to 45,000. It's even smaller. So the first reality is rural is growing more than urban right now globally. Secondly, our rural-urban dichotomy is not as bad for us because the narrative is broken and urban people feel they're right and rural America is hurting them. It isn't true. The deeper issue is the R&D politics. And the R&D politics play into the rural-urban politics.
We're not talking research and development.
We are not. We're talking Republican and Democrat. Yeah. And the point I made today to this audience was that the challenge we have today is that our political system is controlled by our economic system. Today, about $40 billion a year is spent in convincing America that the other side is wrong. And these two major political machines, the very left and the very right, ignore most of us that are in the middle and want really good solutions. Rural people are largely in that middle. But the problem is we have 30-year-old kids making $100,000 every year in this political machine to destroy the other political machine. Solutions do not come from that. Further fighting does. That's the second large problem. That plays into the first. Because rural America's problem is we have a Democratic Party who believes they will never get the rural vote and a Republican Party who believes they don't need to do anything to keep the rural vote. For rural America, we're in trouble there. The last issue is how we think about those two things as we go to the local level. And I think at the local level, we are beginning to see an understanding that the continuum from urban to rural is simply that, a continuum. Rural people and places will never advance until they link to wealthier people and places. And in a new world where we need distributed energy and food and transportation, there's an awful lot urban America needs that rural America stewards. I think in that mix at some point, Chad, is a whole new future for all of us.
A simple prescription to get past the R&D problem.
Turn off the Fox News and turn off MSNBC. Watch some college football this fall.
Great. We will take a break. We will be back with one more segment of this topic on the county seat. We'll see you in just a minute.
The best part about raising children here in Vernal and the Uinta Basin is just the smaller community that makes you feel like when you go somewhere, you know everybody.
It's not too big, it's not too small. We're close to the Wasatch Front if there's anything we need out there.
So we packed up our 3 kids and here we came to Uinta County. And what a great place it was. What a great move.
My job has offered me the ability to college educate all 3 of my children.
My father, he was an engineer for Chevron, retired 39 some odd years. And Jeff, my husband, it's the same way. He's always worked in the oil and gas, always had a job here.
Uinta Basin has been fantastic in supporting what we've tried to do both as a business and also in the development of mountain bike trails and the sport of mountain biking.
It's one of the big reasons why I live where I live is I'm able to run up to a beautiful place like this and spend some good quality time. There's always plenty to do in Uinta County.
The State of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, SITLA, manages 3.5 million acres of Utah lands with the express purpose of providing financial support to further the education of Utah's students, while promoting local industry, oil and gas, even residential development, all at the same time. Through the careful use of trust lands, the School Land Trust Program will distribute nearly $37 million to Utah schools this year. The State of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, building the state's permanent school fund.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're having a great conversation with Chuck Fluharty today about the future of rural America. We've kind of covered where we're going wrong, what we need to do, how we need to turn off the TV. I might add, not this show, please, because this is about government, not politics. Now let's talk about the prescription. What do we need to do?
Okay, it's very easy, but hard to do. We need to change the rural narrative in this nation. As I said, the rural narrative right now is an economy that's struggling and not contributing to GDP, because we believe the urban economies are the engines of an economic future. The OECD study I mentioned showed that absolutely is not true. That is a social construct of reality that does not mirror reality. There are major growth patterns in rural futures. So first of all, rural is about national prosperity. The goal of every nation is to increase its GDP. Rural America has a huge, huge opportunity to contribute to that in new and exciting ways. Second is resilience. 40% of our people live within 50 miles of a coast. You know what global climate change has done recently. We know that pandemics are coming. We know there's a new SARS bug out there. We are going to have major crises in our future. I want to argue that the social diseconomy of our urban places is at least as risky as the social cost of distance in rural areas. Rural America offers a tremendous resilience and sustainability opportunity to the nation. We are distributed in smaller regional economies. We can be self-sustaining. It will improve all of our economies if we can build food systems, energy systems, education systems, entrepreneurship systems within a 5 to 10 county area. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, is cultural, history, arts, and amenities. Rural America has 5 things urban America does not produce: clean air, clean water, safe and affordable food, safe and affordable energy, and history, arts, culture. All of the things that amenities necessary for an urban future are sought out in rural areas. We need to begin to engage our urban brothers and sisters from not a position of weakness and whine, but a position of recognize what we bring to you and let's work together to increase America's advantages in all of these areas. That should be the new narrative, I think, Chad.
So it's as simple as telling a new story?
Telling a new story in exciting ways to the people we aren't talking to. Rural Americans are very good at getting together around the coffee shop before they go out and do chores and whining a bit about how no one understands them. There's a dark side to that culture. Shows like yours, fortunately, are beginning to break that down. We need to find new ways to deal with the public intellectuals in urban America, the housewives in Nyasack, New York, who don't appreciate what rural Utah is bringing to them. It is their livelihood. I love all this about the global cities. How long will that concrete go without air, water, food, and energy? Not too awful long. Rural people and places are the stewards of all that. It's a blessing to our nation. We need to tell that story in a way that unites us, not divides us.
Excellent. Gosh, we've wrapped this up. I would actually like to, and this is going to drive my producers crazy, I still have an area that I'd like to cover. We can't do it on the broadcast part of the show. Would you stay over and let's do one more segment?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for joining us. If you want to continue the conversation, I'd like to look at the education role in all of this, and we will do that on the website side of the county seat. Thank you for joining us. Remember, the county seat is the show that is about local government, not local politics, and that local governance is where your life actually really happens. So stay tuned, take notes, and tell your friends to watch the show. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Family time seems to be at a premium nowadays, with more and more things getting in the way of what's really important. It's time to change focus with At Your Leisure and get outdoors with those you care about. Outdoor adventure at its best, At Your Leisure, Saturday nights at 10:30 and Sunday mornings at 9 on ABC4 Utah.